So my girlfriend took me kayaking, not for the first time, but just for the second time actually this week, and it was a lovely time. And we're chatting to someone today about, actually we're hanging out with Alistair from Ashenspire, who we had on the show a little while ago.
Yeah, cool.
Today, that was really nice. He was down in London for a wedding, so we just grabbed coffee. And Alistair was like, "No, can't do kayaking. I love canoes. It's canoeing for me." And I this is the discourse that I've experienced since I've been kayaking, or like since I was gonna go had arranged to go kayaking, out of just like, yeah, I'd like to be on the canal. I want to be on the water. That sounds like a chill time. Immediately, it turns out people have very strong opinions, and the opinions are specifically canoes versus kayaks. Like, it's not, I'll just say this, it's not the water sports discourse that I'm used to, but every day is a school day, right? Like, I didn't know people were so fucked up about it, but I have seen people get like actually kind of vehement. So, fellow Red Planet hosts, what's your position on the boating issue?
My understanding, right, is a canoe a little bit longer and kind of like wider, whereas kayak is more like something that's generally just like maybe like one or two people, just like a small thing.
So a kayak has a closed top and a double-ended paddle, and you paddle by paddling like that, which is useless to the podcast listeners, but I'm just going to say paddling like that.
Yeah.
And then the canoe has a one-ended paddle and an open top, and you do this thing, which is also useless to the podcast listeners. Listeners, if you know what canoe paddling looks like, I'm demonstrating for everyone, even though everyone knows what canoe paddling looks like.
Yeah.
So
I'm bisexual, so I like them both.
That's reasonable.
So you don't hear the word canoe here very often. Like kayaking you hear a lot, but I guess like most people I know that do that stuff call it waka, which is like our traditional word for it. Like even white people would like say that down here. Okay. And that's like the same, like even with our traditional canoe, which we call waka, the single bladed paddle sort of thing.
Gotcha.
I guess, I mean, it depends on if it's a solo activity. Kayak's pretty good, but if you're going with a couple people, then canoe seems like the way to go. I don't know, it depends on the conditions as well, right? Like,
I mean, it's just one of those things where I guess human beings just love to have a little discourse. I wouldn't say I've heard cogent arguments in favor of either side. It's just people saying over and over again,
personal preference.
Canoes, no, kayaks.
The joys of touching grass.
Anyway, Red Planet listeners, please email,
the big issues.
Based at redplanetshow.com. Let us know if you love to paddle, what kind of paddling you do. Any kind of paddling is Red Planet approved. We are in favor of total unity. It's Red Planet.
Here we are.
And the first thing we want to know about on Red Planet is always, Mule, what's the most base thing you did this week?
Yeah, well, we've been off for a couple of weeks, and there's been some pretty cool stuff going on at GMTU. For example, the Tenants Union Conference. So, this was the GMTU annual conference, the second annual conference that we've ever done, and we had guests from all over the country and the world, actually, which is really impressive in terms of like our links with international organizations and stuff like that. Now, this isn't necessarily like the most base thing that I've done, because I actually had nothing to do with it. It was all organized by one of our political officers, Amira, and also Isaac, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. But the beautiful thing about it, the reason that I'm telling everybody about it, is because it is really important, because alongside these sort of bigger tenants unions that are normally at these things, for example, Living Rent in Scotland, CATU, London Renters Union. CATU, for those who don't know, that's Community Action Tenants Union in Ireland. They have branches all over Ireland, Dublin, Belfast, Kildare, etc. But now, this time round, there are a bunch of new tenants unions, smaller tenants unions, from all over England. Outer England is what we called it. So anywhere that's outside of London, really. We've spoken on the show a lot about how in the UK everything is very London-centric, and so we made a point of having an entire panel where none of the panelists were from London Renters Union. In fact, I don't think anyone from London Renters Union was actually scheduled to be on any of the panels. But we had a point of having the entirety of the Outer England newer tenants unions all on this panel to talk about why they started, what they're doing, what kind of issues they're facing with regards to housing in their area. And it's all like vastly similar stuff to what we deal with in GMTU and also London Renters Union, Live and Rent, CATU. It's not like it's massively different in Outer England, but it is a lot of, people in council housing, people in social housing, struggling with massive, horrific disrepair, being sick because of it, et cetera, et cetera. It's all the same story, basically. But it was really, really good to see these new unions. So I'm going to try and rattle them off because it's really based to just like think about how many are actually in the UK now. So closer to home, we've got Liverpool Residents Action. Really cool. If you're a Scouser, if you're in Merseyside, get involved with them. Lancaster Tenants Union, which is TACU. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's Tenant Action, maybe Tenant Action Community Union. I think it's that. But they're in Lancaster and also in the wider sort of Lancaster-Morecambe area. Also got Housing Action Teesside, aka HAT, and Southampton Tenants Union. And there's another one. I've completely forgotten what it is, and I'm going to kick myself when I remember. But yeah, it's really, really based to just see that there's like that many essentially, and they're all just like doing amazing stuff already. They've already started campaigns. They've already started to like do things based on, Sheffield Tenants Union. That's the one I missed out. I knew it because obviously Sheffield is literally like 40 minutes away from Manchester. Really, really, really good stuff. So there you go. Very exciting. Lots of new tenants unions springing up. And then just some standard stuff that I actually did personally this week. I represented a member who is in social housing in a negotiation with her housing association provider this week. Basically, she's a single mom with a baby, and the house that she was in is just like so inappropriate for a baby. There's like a spiral staircase to get to the kitchen. There's just absolutely no way you could safely walk down that with like a baby in your arms. And if the baby like falls down it or whatever, like, it doesn't bear thinking about. Damp and mold everywhere, rats, all this kind of stuff. It was just completely inappropriate. So we sat in this meeting and basically demanded, give our member a better house. Like, it's your responsibility. You have a duty of care, or at the very least, extend her temporary accommodation, indefinitely, so that she can stay on the housing list, and at least she has somewhere to stay, somewhere to live. It's not ideal, but at least the housing association are going to be paying for it, kind of thing. So did that. We got them to agree to it, so that was a fantastic win. And yeah, they've actually said to us that they're going to sort of collaborate with us. So this housing association are called Riverside Housing. They're going to collaborate with us to basically put pressure on Manchester Move to like put her up a band, because you get prioritized in bands essentially. And it's kind of like, I don't know. I think the way that they kind of like do it is if you're in like direct danger, if you're fleeing from domestic abuse, etc., you're in band 1. But then like anything sort of like less serious but still quite serious is band 2, and then anything below that is band 3, and then I think there might be a band 4 for people who like just don't need to move. So yeah, we're going to be trying to apply pressure, and it's good that Riverside are doing it, because we're not just saying our member's special and she needs to be put into band 1. It's more like Riverside are saying, yeah, we fucked up this lady's housing situation, and she needs a safe place to live, and we can't actually offer her that. So please, can you help? So that was really good. But that's me, and I want to know about Tim. What's the most base thing that you did this week? Or in the past couple of weeks?
Yeah. I've been really busy with work, as hosts know, but as viewers might not. I'm gonna be taking a couple weeks off, so I've been just grinding extremely hard to make sure that that's okay. As a Tedalist, we don't get like sick days, holiday pay, anything like that. So basically just been like working really hard at work. I mean, it's not really any form of activism, but I was talking to someone earlier that reminded me that I did make a tweet that got a lot of Zionists really, really, really mad, maybe like a week and a half ago. So, like I haven't seen you guys since then. But yeah, I just made a post about Lebanon killing there was a 9-year-old girl that got killed in Lebanon by the IDF with their exploding pages terrorism IED thing, and how they had already begun these kind of like like these campaigns to say like, oh, like it's because she was from a terrorist family, and so like it's her family's fault that she's dead and all this kind of stuff. And I think I made a tweet about how uh so we're supposed to believe that like every little girl killed in Lebanon is like a terrorist, but then we have like we see these Israeli like literal like soldiers, like actual, whether they're active soldiers or reservists being killed, and we have to pretend like every one of them is like an innocent sweet baby angel. So I can't remember exactly what I said, and it blew up. Like there was like over 100,000 likes and shares and all this kind of stuff, but it just led to this like deranged Zionist like campaign where it's like every single tweet or reply or anything, or like anything they could find about me online, they were like getting in there or whatever. Even there was like an attempted doxing, which was pretty funny because they were
Jesus
like,
Christ.
there was like this guy that was like, this is where he works and all this kind of stuff. It was like a shop that doesn't even exist anymore that I used to work at. But I mean, I like to have fun, so I just retweeted it and was like, come on down, like this is, you want to get a tattoo, like come on, and yeah, so that was it was like an interesting, I don't know, it was like maybe like 4 days or so that it went on for. um and I mean, I'm not particularly frightened of, I don't think like anyone really is gonna attempt anything on me or whatever. I mean, I'm not a very private person online. Like people know how to find me, know where I am. I use my real name and face and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've had people come up to me before, but it's never been like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of my critics are the most physically and intellectually least intimidating people you could imagine. So I'm not too bothered about it. But yeah, that was enough activism for me on that day. But yeah, no, that's all I've really gotten up to in the last couple of weeks because, as I said, I have been on the grind. But what about you, Soph? What have you been up to?
Yeah, there's been a few things. It has mostly been work, and one of the things is still going to be work. I'm going to lead with that one actually. I returned to work. I put a new video out yesterday.
Yeah,
It's called The Endings Machine: Technology and Teleology. It's about how we approach technology as human beings and how it's kind of co-opted by capitalism. Big surprise. And what we can do to reapproach technology from a leftist perspective, I guess. And yeah, that's it's been a kind of long journey to returning to work and getting something out. And I'm excited to be back. I'm already working on my next thing. Well, I'm working on a few next things. I kind of always am. But I recorded my next video, the video parts for it, this week. That's something about Aaron Bushnell, the serviceman who self-immolated, in protest of the genocide in Gaza. And yeah, I'm back to publishing, and that feels really good. And this leads into probably the actually most based thing since the last show, because the thing I just said is work and is kind of just like my writing or my videos, whatever. The thing after this is also going to be like just some writing kind of. But most based thing I did, in that essay that I've just released, I talked about how cooking big meals together with friends and sharing a big group meal can be a great like opportunity to chat, to organize, to be in community, to build community. And also like if you want to engage in veganism as a boycott of the meat industry, you can you can do it more effectively by cooking a big scran for everyone, right? And so if people listening follow my Instagram at all, you will have seen that like a lot of this year I've been working on getting better at cooking. So I hosted a big group vegan meal for some friends, and that felt really good. It was actually my sister who helped me film, suggested, she was in a group chat with me and a friend and said, ever since we filmed that thing, I've been thinking about this and we should just be having regular big group vegan meals. So we started that last week at mine, and we're gonna like rotate around and do it at different places. And maybe that'll be a thing that like gets bigger. Don't know. Could be a community thing, and I'm excited about it. I'm kind of like, it's one of several things that I'm not sure I will talk loads about because they're a little bit private, but like have to do with building community around me, and that community being a little bit more materially interdependent, self-sufficient, like actually growing, kind of growing community materially. But yeah, I was excited about that. I think that's the most based thing I did since last show. My extra note of something based is that I've started work on a piece to do with, which I don't think is actually going to come out as a video. I think it's just going to be writing, because I think of it much more as being like an article or a piece as opposed to like something that would be good as a video essay. But I talked before on the show about how when my income collapsed, I had to do full service sex work to make sure I could pay rent. And I have started writing something about trans women, sex work, and class. And I'm hopefully going to collaborate with a couple of orgs and some people from some orgs that work in that general space to produce that. So that's the update now. I'm probably not going to give another update on that until like it's out as a thing. But yeah, those are things I've been up to.
Nice. And so it looks like we got a based viewer here as well. Let's see. Based viewer Jupiter has written in saying the following: I helped run a weekend-long assembly for housing justice organizers in the UK. I met lots of comrades from tenants unions in other cities. It was a screening of Mother City, a documentary film about a tenants movement in Cape Town. We visited a comrades community garden they started outside their block and had educational sessions on building towards rent controls, solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for land. Whilst I was very tired and sore by the end of the weekend, I had a great time and feel very invigorated by how successfully the event ran. Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like it went well. Cool. So, if you have a base thing like Jupiter that you've been doing, anything that's going on in your community, you can message us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns, and if you're cool with that, we might shout it out in a later episode. Cool. But now let's get into the news. Mule, what's been happening in Lebanon?
Yes, thank you, Tim. Israel conducts terrorist attack airstrikes in Lebanon. On September the 17th, Israel detonated thousands of explosives concealed within pages that had been used by civilians in Lebanon. Claiming to have been targeted Hezbollah militants, the attack injured around 3,000 civilians and killed 37 others, including children. The day after, Israel also blew up walkie-talkies, mobile phones, and laptops that had also been sold to Lebanese civilians. These explosions injured 450 and killed 14. The reasoning behind this particularly sickening strategy is because Israel has historically tracked and surveilled Lebanese people using digital devices such as smartphones, so Hezbollah and other Lebanese people opt for using analog devices to reduce the chances of surveillance. This meant that Israel knew it would be feasible to smuggle explosives into such analog devices that Hezbollah had ordered themselves for the population to kill, maim, and disable thousands of people. It should be noted that the current reporting suggests that a majority of these devices had the weapons put into them by Mossad agents at a Taiwanese company called Gold Apollo, based in Taipei. There is no questioning that this attack is terrorist in nature, indiscriminate targeting, definitely no other strategic benefit other than causing fear and panic in a civilian population, and quite clearly, of course, targeting Arabs as a people. There are no Israeli hostages in Lebanon, and even if there were, this is so clearly cut a war crime, one that has been given the green light by the lack of consequences from imperialist states for Israel's genocidal warmongering. Since then, as Israel and Hezbollah have exchanged fire, with Hezbollah successfully striking Tel Aviv, Mossad HQ, and weapons bunkers, among other such targets in Israel, and Israel responding by carpet bombing residential areas, as Israel does, injuring 6,352 and killing approximately 1,030 as of Saturday morning. But according to the Lebanese Health Minister Firas Abiad, there are still martyrs under the rubble, missing persons, and scattered remains. Hezbollah leader Sayed Hassan Nasrallah was also one of those killed by the bombings. May he rest in power. Any thoughts on this, folks?
Just fucking vile. I don't know. Like, I mean, Hezbollah formed in response to Israel trying to invade Lebanon in the 80s. Like, I think it's what a surprise that they're pissed off at Israel and don't want Israel continuing to try and do that. It's all Greater Israel, right? It's all the BB holding the map of just like the northern half of the Arabian Peninsula and the whole of the Middle East is just is Israel in his mind. Like, yeah.
And I mean, there have been IDF senior members, senior officials, and like politicians over there talking about how this was the goal, and like they finally have the excuse to do in Lebanon what they've wanted to do for ages, and and it's like even with the assassination of Nasrallah, which they said was the objective, they're still bombing, like they're bombing right now, like. But they've achieved the objective they said they were going. It's like it's they're doing the exact same thing over there. Even with like the way that they said the other day, I saw for the first time the Hezbollah run health ministry mentioned. Just like the Hamas run health ministry, same thing that they did.
We were looking at the covers of some of those just like awful wonk publications. The liberal slop ones, just The Economist, The Atlantic, these things, and like seeing the Israel-Hezbollah conflict. It's just like how many conflicts is Israel having with just an organization within a country before we can finally like say that they're actually at war with like all their neighbors and trying to wipe them out so that they can dominate their territory.
Like Hezbollah is a political party within Lebanon. Like it's like. You know what I mean? It's a particular organization. It's an amount of people, etc.
Yeah.
Like it's like a union. It's a group of people who subscribe to a particular name of an organization and what it stands for, etc. And it's like what did you do? Did you like look at all that, like that entire block of like 6 tower blocks that you just bombed and made sure that every single person, including the babies inside those tower blocks, were like definitely voting for Hezbollah, supporting Hezbollah, etc., etc. Anyway, fuck Israel. Tim, tell us about what's been going down in not necessarily down under. It's not really down under. That's Australia. Is it down under?
I mean, it's further down.
It's further down.
More under.
Down
Dunedin is very, very south. It's it's down in the South Island, and it's very cold. It's very under. It's I think it meets the criteria. It's like cool. I think it's actually it's Invercargill is further down, but aside from Invercargill, Dunedin is one of the most down under cities.
There you go. Must be going on down under.
yeah. So this happened just the other day, a couple of days ago now, and this is another thing where it's like it just makes you. Like, it's on one hand, it really makes you like see the potential and feel really proud and all this kind of stuff, but it also kind of like points to some really terrible things. So the biggest protest in Dunedin in decades is up to 35,000 rallied against hospital cuts. So this was just 35,000 just in Dunedin. Which there was also other protests going on in sync with this, like just around in Westport there was another with like 1,000 there. There's other little towns all the way up to, I think, like, yeah, just up into the North Island as well. Because our government is, there's a bunch of cuts to the health, kind of like the just a health system in general going on with our new coalition government. But in particular, there's a hospital in Dunedin that was the government that got in, the coalition of all the right-wing parties. They promised that they would fix up and redevelop this one hospital in Dunedin because it's the one that serves like, you know, the entire area, and it's like really important, and it's like a lot of jobs as well as being, you know, like kind of critical infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. And they just announced a bunch of serious cuts to that where they're like, it's basically not going to happen. And so, you know, because of their budget cuts, and this is the same budget, this is the same government who I've mentioned in previous streams, they've managed to budget about like $2.9 billion towards tax cuts for landlords, which, you know, like a lot of these MPs are landlords, you know. But yeah, and so a lot of people are taking that very personally, where they say, okay, so there's money for landlords, but we can't even get the hospital fixed up, which you promised us. Like, this was an election promise. And it's just like a very significant kind of part of Dunedin, of the city there, you know. One thing that is like the most, I think, amazing part of this gigantic rally, though, is that Dunedin only has about 129,000 people living there, and they're saying about 35,000 showed up, which is like, you know, like that's like a tiny little bit over a quarter, right? Like that's, you know, like in a city like that, that's like incredible. So yeah, they're basically trying to say, well, the government is trying to say that like, oh, you know, like the economy's changed, things have changed, we have to, you know, we had to renegotiate, we had to look at things to cut and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think people down there are really buying it. You know, they're saying, oh, we're going to commit to, you know, doing other things to help improve the infrastructure and all that kind of stuff, but our health system at the moment is like super strained already. It's like waiting times are just like gigantic. Most people either end up having to pay to go private or going overseas. It is like the obvious plan is the neoliberal thing where they're trying to defund our health system to make a case for privatization, because for years we had a good public system, but subsequent governments have been just kind of like chipping away at it, making it less, you know, like less desirable, so that government can push for privatization and say like, this is how we, you know, this is how we get it going. Which I think they thought was going to be a better I think they thought it was going to work out better for them. But I think if we can get like a quarter of the entire population of Dunedin to turn up like this, I think that's pretty incredible. Like I said, it does point to some darker things, like, you know, like this is a hospital, people are literally going to die like while they're waiting for these, you know, this redevelopment. But yeah, also just like the people power, the people turning out in the streets for it is really is a really welcome thing to see. But why don't you tell us about some more people power over in India? So
Yeah, absolutely. Sure thing. So this is about Samsung workers protesting in India. About 1.5 thousand workers at Samsung's factory in Chennai are striking, demanding the company recognize their newly formed union, which is SILWU, and negotiate better wages and working conditions. Workers backed by the Center of Indian Trade Unions, C2, want collective bargaining and a 50% wage increase over 3 years. Samsung denies labor law violations, which is just, it's Samsung. Yes, they violate labor laws. They're a massive conglomerate corporation. And says discussions are ongoing. So hopefully they are. Workers allege unsafe working conditions, unrealistic production targets, and pressure to leave the union, which is no big surprise. Samsung denies these claims and states compliance with labor laws. Labor experts note that many multinational corporations in India use contract labor to prevent unionization, hiring young workers and keeping wages stagnant, a practice seen as exploiting local labor laws. The Tamil Nadu government has initiated talks to resolve the strike, while labor activists argue that global unions can help pressure companies like Samsung to follow international labor standards. Yes, internationalism is everything. Mule, you have another Israel story to tell us, right? Because in the time we've been in the time since the last show, Israel has just been up to so much. So you've got an update in Palestine as opposed to our Lebanon story from earlier.
Yeah, that's right. So this is about the Israeli military shutting down Al Jazeera. It was a bureau in the West Bank because Israel have been stepping up raids in the West Bank. They've essentially invaded the West Bank. It's something that the world's media is just obviously not commenting on whatsoever because there's no way they can spin it in favor of Israel. They can't say that Hamas are in the West Bank because they're just not. There is obviously resistance in the West Bank, but, you know, people will start to empathize with Palestinians if they show the resistance in the West Bank, so nonsense. But anyway, we're here to report on it, as are lots of other base people, but this one is particularly about when they shut down the Al Jazeera bureau. So Israeli soldiers raided Al Jazeera's bureau in Ramallah, issuing a 45-day closure order. Heavily armed troops entered the office, ordered staff to leave, and confiscated equipment and documents. The Israeli military accused Al Jazeera of inciting and supporting terrorism, especially linking the network's coverage to Hamas and other militant groups. Al Jazeera denies these claims, maintaining its role as a neutral news outlet. A raid follows a May order preventing Al Jazeera from broadcasting in Israel. It also reflects a broader Israeli crackdown on media coverage critical of the government's actions in Gaza and the West Bank. The raid drew immediate condemnation from media rights groups, the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, and international organizations, calling it a violation of press freedom and international law. The raid on Al Jazeera's office is part of a wider tensions amid the Israel-Hamas I don't want to call it the Israel-Hamas war, amid the genocide of Palestinians. The Israeli government has repeatedly targeted the network, especially for its ongoing coverage of casualties and on-the-ground reporting. Al Jazeera has faced similar actions before, including in Gaza, and from other governments. The network has been accused of incitement in Israel, the US, and other countries, but continues broadcasting, notably from Amman in Jordan. So more fuckery from Israel. Literally shutting down the press, literally just like stopping freedom of speech. Really, really normal. Definitely not fascists. They're definitely not the Nazis of today. Tim, tell us about some good news.
So in Sri Lanka, we've covered the kind of developing situation in Sri Lanka a couple times here in the news, but so in a further move away from the political establishment, in line with the protests we saw over the last year in Sri Lanka, the country has just voted in a Marxist former lawmaker, Anura Kumara Desanayake, as its new president. So last year, after sustained mass protests and systemic political collapse in Sri Lanka, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled the country and his government essentially evaporated. So we covered that a lot at the time. There was like a lot of accusations of like corruption, and there was like a lot of people from the same family appointed to all these different jobs. And so maybe just like that one family left, and that was the entire government. So the government fell apart, kind of thing. So incredible footage showed masses of Sri Lankan people storming the government and occupying its offices after their protests against IMF neoliberal structural adjustments chased off Rajapaksa's nepotistic political clique. Here we go. So the IMF loans have been like a huge thing in Sri Lanka about like they have arrangements to pay them back at certain rates in exchange for more money. So it's like they kind of have to they keep them on a leash where it's like they have to fulfill certain criteria, and then they'll get the next chunk of money, like at different times, sort of breaks, whatever. So Now, over a year later, Sri Lanka has held presidential elections and chosen Dissanayake, commonly referred to by his initials AKD, to be its leader. He is the current leader of the Janatha Vimukti Puramuna, which is a leftist political party in Sri Lanka that started as a revolutionary movement and was involved in 2 armed uprisings in the 70s and 80s. He is also the leader
Let's
of the
fucking
National
go.
People's Power, which is a coalition of leftist parties, which is also great to see. So a revolutionary organization establishing themselves and becoming, like a long-term mainstays, and then getting elected as, the governing party as a president, and also being the leader of a coalition of leftist parties fucking rules as well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm so excited about it. The footage from when they the masses of Sri Lankan people stormed the government and stormed the presidential palace. When I don't even know what I was more excited about was when they were just playing in his swimming pool, or when they were when they sat around the big conference table and just made fun of pretended to be the guys having the structural adjustment talks.
It's a great storming the Winter Palace moment. But and so the main challenge for the new government will be tackling the ongoing economic crisis in the country. Yeah, so that's basically the deal, right? He said that he's going to try and do his best to ease the tensions on the working class people, because so the country has to make these payments back, whatever. And in the past, there's been the way that they have made those payments is by just austerity policies where they're pushing that burden onto the working class people while the elites kind of do their thing and they live in the giant palaces and all that kind of just the regular kind of stuff, whereas he's said that he wants to kind of leverage it back in the opposite direction. And maybe I mean they're still in very early days of it now, but negotiating with the IMF for some kind of reduced payments, so it's not going to be as bad, or kind of pushing it towards so there's more corporate taxes to pay for instead of on the average working person. So we'll see that develop, I'm guessing, over the next couple weeks, couple months. And I'm hoping everything goes well for them and nobody suddenly discovers gas or lithium or anything like that in Sri Lanka.
I was gonna say, all else being equal, taxing the rich and helping out the working class is just the better economic strategy and will make them able to pay back their loan faster. But then I realized I was about to say all else being equal, and it's okay.
So we'll see how it goes, but awesome news in Sri Lanka. But what about what's heard that someone made some alterations to a Van Gogh painting perhaps recently? What's going on over there?
Well, it's a huge it's an issue of art criticism. Basically, I think that some people from some organization, JSO, which I assume is an art criticism organization, they have strong feelings that actually paintings by Dutch people look better when they're covered in soup. And so and the British media and lots of right-wing pundits, they don't think so. They think that actually you should see the painting exactly as it was originally intended. I don't know how to introduce, people know about the soup on the Van Gogh painting. This is a massively viral protest action, probably the most famous. Yeah, probably the most famous thing that Just Up Oil actually has done is throwing soup onto the protective case around a Van Gogh painting, which is just crucial to say because it's just that's where the soup went,
And every statement has always, they've always been and the painting is unharmed. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. They tried to in previously litigating this case, they charged the protesters with criminal damage and said it was £10,000 of criminal damage to the frame. The frame is apparently so expensive, and I can believe that the frame they would put on a Van Gogh painting is really expensive. because they're fucking idiots and they don't think that like someone might ever come and attack a painting or have a protest at it, and like just like put a normal frame on it. You know, you want to make it look nice, you can do that. It doesn't have to be a £10,000 frame. That's a you problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you know, I'm having a laugh with the story, but like something really horrible has happened, which is that Phoebe and Anna, the two Just Stop Oil activists who threw the soup onto the Van Gogh painting, have been sentenced to 2 years in prison each. It's not completely even 2 years. One of them has gotten 2 years, the other one has gotten 20 months. And the one who's gotten the longest sentence is basically, it's the judge ruled it should be longer because she also took part in a march or something and disrupted traffic, I guess, which is just ridiculous, right? So the judge told the jury not to consider climate change in their verdict because, in his words, it was neither here nor there. It's just a continually frustrating, like, ongoing British moment where like judges keep on trying to tell people who are prosecuting Just Stop Oil activists not to consider climate change, and that's not actually the law. Like, actually, juries are allowed to, you know, reach their conclusion whatever way, as long as they do it, you know, unanimously and pass their verdict.
Yeah.
And the moral reasoning behind why someone did something is relevant to their case and whatever. But like, yeah, obviously, like the jury is going to listen to the guy who is there to be the expert on what the law is, the judge, right? So, so yeah, he said it was neither here nor there. This week has also seen actionists for Palestine Action US jailed, although only for 2 months. Calla Walsh, some people might be familiar with, is one of them. And I think that's a really good comparison point between, like, you know, the US with all the context of the US and the context of the genocide in Gaza, and you know, their opposition to any kind of protest for Palestine, like only gave them 2 months, right? And some people who threw soup on a painting in the UK are getting 2 years in prison. Like, this is fucking ridiculous, and I think that it does really point to like how authoritarian the application of the law is around protests specifically under the new Starmer government. Yeah, so that's
Speaking of which,
no, Tim, you're going to say something.
I was going to say, particularly that judge has a record for this kind of thing as well, and I feel like it's like very like, yeah, like I mean, down here we hear a lot of like activist judge kind of talk, but it's only ever when a judge rules in favor of like a minority or like something like that. They go like, look at these activist judges and stuff, but then it's like you never hear anyone talk about activist judges in the, you know, in this kind of
yeah, of course, even though that's clearly what it is. Yeah. So sorry for screwing up the transition between stories there. So Mule, that was a story about a dead Dutch man's painting, and you have a story about cracking down on protest.
I do. And what's really unfortunate about this story will become apparent as I get into it. And it's very serious and about very serious political stuff, but it's full of Dutch names. So, Dutch government moves to restrict the right to protest by stopping protesters covering their faces. After elections earlier this year, the Netherlands saw a massive increase in far-right political control in the country. Per Politico, Dick Schoof, a former Dutch intelligence boss of no party alignment and who was not on the ballot in the November election, is replacing Mark Rutte as the Prime Minister. The election results have left the Dutch parliament fragmented, with the far-right Party for Freedom, which received the most votes, taking government positions such as asylum, foreign trade and healthcare, a liberal and centrist party who earned second and third place respectively. There has also been some capture of the vote by a new party formed to represent the Dutch farmers, which now controls policy around housing and agriculture. From Politico again, some Dutch commentators have already characterized Schoof's team as constituting 4 separate cabinets rather than a single united one. Geerten Boegaard, a professor of local government at the University of Leiden, noted the risk is high that each political actor will be lobbying for their own interest and maintaining their power base rather than work towards collective success. Now a plan by Dutch politician and broadcaster Joost Eerdmans and Chris Stuffer the pro-Israeli leader of the Christian Dutch Party, the Reformed Party, to ban face coverings at protests has been met with majority support in Dutch Parliament. Silly Dutch names aside, it's a made-up language. What a joke, what a clown language they invented.
The vowels per word in this story higher than in any other story we've ever covered.
Horrific. Again, more anti-protester laws. This is just like the final act of neoliberalism, where fascism just kind of like gets completely insane. Every single country has like an element of fascism in the government, and they start like enacting these laws. And eventually they won't win, because people will continue to protest. People will continue to do actions. It just won't stop, as demonstrated by the earlier story. JSO also threw some more soup on some more paintings as a result of this.
That was really funny. Just responding with an action where like they throw soup on the original painting and then also the painting next to it. Just like every painting gets soup. Like that's just objectively hilarious.
Perfect. And this another thing I think is important to say, because I don't think we report on Dutch actionists that often, to be honest. And you got to give them a lot of solidarity and support, because there are so many really, really good squatters in the Netherlands. There were a lot of great squat groups in Amsterdam, and also there were some fantastic pro-Palestine encampments in Holland as well, that were doing some amazing stuff, like building actually like out of bricks barricades so that the police couldn't cross canals. So really, really, really good stuff. And that's why the Dutch government has moved to restrict more rights to protest by basically allowing them to be surveilled directly by the state, essentially, by making them uncover their faces. But Tim, let's talk about some more absolutely based actions from the Boeing machinists.
Yeah, cool. So the Boeing machinists have been going on strike since the 13th of September, saying that they've saved enough money to help them hold out as long as possible after 95% of the unionized workers voted to reject a new contract from their employer, which we love to see. We love when unions have just managed to stockpile enough away that they're like, no, we can sit on this. Because as we've said time and time again when we've followed a lot of these kind of stories, hitting them in the pocket is what hurts them and their bottom lines. More days striking means lack of productivity, missing deadlines, all that kind of stuff, which is extremely, extremely expensive for a business. So from CNBC, we've got we can't afford to own a home, said Jake Meyer, a Boeing mechanic who said he will start driving for a food delivery service during the strike and is looking at picking up odd jobs such as moving furniture. Meyer said although he's striking for higher pay from Boeing, he enjoys the job of building airplanes. I take pride in my work, he said. This is like another thing. It's like a lot of people act like when you see people striking, like, you'll see the classic story is like, oh, they're lazy, or like, like they don't want to work. But I think a lot of people actually do like to work, and they take pride in their work, and like they do skilled work that is valuable. But it's just they deserve to get paid adequately for that. So the strike is costing Boeing $50 million a day, according to analysis at the Bank of America. More than 30,000 workers are currently on strike. Like, that's huge. 30,000 workers, 50 million a day is like...
50 million a day just feels so good to hear.
Like, how long can a company like that hold out against that, right? Like, that's wild. Like 50 million a day, like that's so the Boeing Corporation has already borrowed money to try to balance the losses they've taken after bad press followed their attempts to cover up a dangerous fault in one of their planes. So the costs of the strike are doubtless putting an enormous pressure on the upper management. So we all saw the stories about the Boeing planes just not doing the one thing they are built to do, which is stay in the air. And then, a bunch of mysterious circumstances around some of the whistleblowers as well. There's lots of weird things going on over there.
One of the whistleblowers like committing suicide after telling a friend, if I die, it was not suicide.
Yeah. And it's like, so you can see, like, so if this is a company that is currently trying to weather out the storm of losing $50 million a day, that kind of shows you how much money they are, like that they have at their disposal, like this isn't like this has been going on for a couple of weeks now. And so if you think about the amount of money that they've decided, like up until this point, it's been money that they can afford to lose, that huge amount of money. Like they could definitely find enough money to engineer some suspicious circumstances, because like that's this also represents money that they are losing, right? Like from the damage to their reputation, the legal kind of ramifications of putting up planes that are faulty and all that kind of stuff. It's huge. So like I think when we're talking about that kind of money, we can't really rule out anything. Especially when it's as suspicious as that. But yeah, but great to see these workers striking. Hopefully their demands are met. Otherwise, hopefully they take Boeing down. But no, yeah, I hope that the union has stockpiled enough away to keep them holding out as long as possible. So, moving on, what's happening with the U.S. dock workers strike?
Yeah, sure thing. This is I think time will tell, but I think this might be a very, very, very important story. So, what is going on? Fans of the plot of the game Disco Elysium will enjoy. U.S. longshoremen prepare for enormous strike to start on October 1st. We're about to go into October, a symbolically relevant and weighty month for international proletarian solidarity, and 45,000 US dock workers are preparing to walk off the job for a strike of indefinite length that would have enormous economic consequences in and outside of the United States. The buildup of this tension has been years long, with dock workers complaining that automation was eliminating jobs while shipping companies have reported higher and higher profits. The US Marine Alliance, USMX, has made repeated offers to the International Longshoremen's Association, ILA, to no avail. So the USMX is basically the umbrella employer of dock workers at least in the East Coast. It might be bicoastal, but the ILA is the East Coast union for US dock workers, and their power is kind of insane. As I researched the story, I found something interesting. I'll point it out as we go, but there's a little bit of kind of, so that historically there have been organized crime allegations against the ILA, and it does seem like there's some kind of dynastic stuff going on with their leadership as well. The reason I say that this could be that fans of Disco Elysium will get a kick out of the story is that, like, you got a union who have been accused of corruption in the past, who are run by some interesting characters who have repeatedly turned down and now are just completely shutting down negotiations with their employer because it looks like are forcing the tension point of a massive strike. The ILA represents dock workers across the East Coast. I already said that. So this stuff from The Guardian. JP Morgan analysts have estimated the strike could cost the US economy $5 billion per day. Because we're talking about one of the whole coasts from Maine to Texas, right? USMX knows what our bottom line with wages needs to be for our ILA rank and file to ratify a new master contract agreement, said Harold J. Daggett, the ILA's international president and chief negotiator. They call me several times each week trying to get the ILA to accept a lowball wage package. My ILA members are not going to accept these insulting offers that are a joke considering the work my ILA longshore workers perform and the billion-dollar profits the companies make off the backs of their labor. That's Harold J. Daggett. And then, without a doubt, we're going to get support from the International Dock Worker Movement, said Dennis Daggett, who is his son, who is also the executive vice president of the ILA. And then Dennis said something really interesting. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but I will tell you this. It's going to be the biggest display of international worker solidarity that the world has ever seen. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting time starting in a couple of days. Maybe. We'll see. If this is nothing, oh well. But if it's something, it's going to be something. The strike is poised to shut down 36 ports, again, from Maine to Texas, the whole East Coast, to handle about half the shipping into the United States. Large US retailers that depend on uninterrupted shipping for their operations are fucking rattled and have written a letter urging President Biden to take action to avoid a strike. The letter was signed by groups including the National Feed and Grain Association, and I just included this in the notes because I find it funny, the Toy Association. It's just like getting menaced by the Toy Association. Jonathan Gold, Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation, said that the strike could be even more disruptive than the delays experienced by docks under the pandemic. The per day delays caused by the strike might cause 4 to 6 days worth of backlog in the system. And as I said earlier, I'm just going to repeat it. The JP Morgan analysts have estimated the strike could cost the US economy $5 billion per day. I think we might be in to see some shit coming up. Yep, that's the news. Let's find out next week, but stay tuned on that one.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's going to be some men with Pinkerton badges showing up around there sometime soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see how that develops. Yeah, cool. So that's all we've got for the news this week.
Yep.
Just a brief little reminder, if you like the show, you want to help support us, look us up on Patreon. Red Planet Patreon. There's different pledge levels for whatever you can spare, and it really helps us out to put on this show. So
yeah, absolutely. So on to our main topic today. We have a guest. Okay, we're talking about abolition. I've referenced the book Abolition Revolution a ton of times. And in that, one of the theses is abolition is the pre-drinks, revolution is the sesh. And when they expand on that idea, it's this idea that tearing down the oppressive technologies that exist right now by replacing them with systems and structures that we want to see is simultaneously getting rid of the old and building the new. Right? It is integral to revolution, and it's integral to replacing what is oppressing us with our own freedom. So we're going to be talking to someone from Abolitionist Futures. We are joined by Juan Fernández. Juan, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So Abolitionist Futures is an org concerned with abolition, but besides that, our audience doesn't know anything about them. So do you want to tell us a bit about Abolitionist Futures?
Yeah, of course. So it is a group. It is not like a charity or anything like that. It's a volunteer-led group of activists and people who are invested in making institutions of surveillance, policing, and punishment redundant, obsolete. And so primarily in terms of what we practically do as a group, apart from being a space where we share these ideas and also interrogate each other about how we fleshed out in our respective sort of spaces that we live and inhabit. Apart from that, we do political education through reading groups and book clubs. We have been running them already for, I think, over 5 years. And then, we tend to host events on specific issues to platform issues that are current and relevant to abolition.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So your involvement with the org, have you been with it the whole time, or?
No, I think Abolitionist Futures was formed after there was a conference on abolition here in the UK in 2018. And after the conference, the groups that had been involved in the conference sort of created Abolitionist Futures as a sort of continuation of that effort. I only joined the organization, I think, on the spring of 2020. In 2011, a Conrad had asked me to join a reading group, but I just didn't have time. And yeah, then 2020 was the moment. And yeah, I've been organizing with the group ever since, and facilitating reading groups ever since.
Fantastic. So I know that you have that Abolitionist Futures has a reading list, so that leads to my next question quite nicely, which is like, what who do you feel that the group draws inspiration from the most? What are the kind of core texts when you're reading and driving political education?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I think like especially when I started, most of the texts came from the US. Like if you think of really leading abolitionist scholars like Mariam Kaba, who founded and had Project NIA for a very long time. I think Project NIA just closed. Or Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who wrote Golden Gulag about the expansion of the prison estate in California and sort of how it is intermeshed with the needs of capitalism, vulture capitalism. We can think also, of course, of Angela Davis, who wrote Are Prisons Obsolete? It's a great book. But then what's been really interesting, especially since 2020, is to see more and more sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily scholars that focus on abolition, because like I think rather it's about activists and scholars whose work has taken them to abolition, and who then sort of translate or try to translate what abolition would mean in their particular spaces. And I think many of us involved in Abolitionist Futures exist in that way. Like we organize in different spaces that may focus on particular things, but we share that sort of ultimate political vision.
Yeah, okay. So sorry, can you remind me the main thing that the main thing is like raising political consciousness and doing political education. So I think I first heard of Abolitionist Futures from an Abolitionists Picnic event, which is quite nice. And wait, Mule, we were there together, weren't we?
Yeah, it's actually where
Prisoner Solidarity Network.
John.
Yeah, we met John.
Yeah, John from Prisoner Solidarity Network, and I think there were some other people that we met. I think we spoke to some people who were like doing some of the stalls at the front. There was like a big thing of stalls. Yeah, it was a great day.
Yeah, we met Cradle Community as well. Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the time that you've been involved, do you feel like, because you're saying like there's more, I guess, academic discussion of abolition, or no, you don't think so?
I wouldn't see it that way. I think when it comes to the reading group, because it's sort of like a 101 to abolition, there are some texts in there that are academic in nature. But we try as much as possible to sort of make sure that the reading list is quite balanced in terms of sort of perspectives from academy. And these are academics that are also very much involved as organizers and activists in abolitionist struggles. So Ruth Wilson Gilmore, for example, and Mariam Kaba and Angela Davis are all sort of organizers. So there's some of these sort of academic profiles, but also many people who like just write articles about their experience with abolition in relation to practice. And many sort of readings, for example, in relation to transformative justice will focus on specific case studies on how that was carried out or practiced or experimented with in the community. So I think we haven't done a gatherings like the picnic in a while. We should definitely repeat that, because it was a great one. But yes, I think it would be amazing to go back to that. But at the moment, because I mean, in typical sort of fashion of groups that are volunteer-led, they have their moments of ebbing and flowing, like of increased capacity and not. And over the last sort of few months, we are actually at a point of like going through a bit of a lull where the focus has been primarily on political education. But yeah, I don't discard the possibility of doing other things. And also very often these collaborations that are beyond sort of the political education stuff that we do are sort of reactive to people coming to us and saying, I have this really interesting project. I want to do something in relation to the arts and abolition. Could you collaborate with us in it? And we recently had one that was really beautiful and produced like these lovely posters trying to sort of illustrate abolitionist ideas through the arts. That was amazing. But yeah, it's a very small group. Like we're maybe 17 people who are connected. And from those, a very small minority who have the capacity to engage on a regular basis. And the group changes also enormously. It's a very sort of typically organic, horizontal, volunteer-led group.
So I'm trying to formulate some questions where I'm kind of asking you to speak to someone who's less like already sold on abolition, but hopefully we'll move past that kind of beginner stuff quickly in the discussion. But here's one anyway. Like when you're saying about how many texts come from America, or obviously the conditions and the context around prisons and the prison system, it's a very specific, very horrible, very cruel. Cops in America are all armed, and the prison system itself is like a massive like slave labor program that evolved directly out of American slavery, right? But if you are by contrast pitching abolition to, what is it, the go-to example? It's like Sweden has like prison cells that are, you know, not super dissimilar to just like staying in a little travel lodge, but you can't leave. Like, you know, could you like talk a bit on, you know, that pitch to someone who, you know, like someone who's just like, what about, you know, really nice prisons? What if we just had really nice prisons instead?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question, because it's a typical, it's a liberal project, right? Like the idea that we can actually rely on these institutions that are tasked with sort of exerting violence and managing inequality, and we could sort of somehow repurpose them into a more virtuous, like health-oriented or inverted commas restorative or rehabilitative function. But that's just, well, on one hand, ahistorical, because those institutions have never served that function. So like from the very beginning of policing, and in that the UK plays sort of such an important role. And at a certain point, let's definitely stop for a second on the history of policing in this country, and how it exported that technology of repression to its colonies and elsewhere. But yeah, like from its very beginnings, the police emerges as a way to discipline populations that are considered deviant, or that in any way threaten the private property of the dominant classes, and particularly threaten the wealth of dominant people in the like bourgeois people in the bourgeoisie who were involved in the slave trade and the exploitation, the colonial exploitation. So actually, the very origins of police are about safeguarding the colonial order, and that continues until today. If you look at, for example, the fact that Black people in this country are between, depending on where you are in the country, between 4 to 9 times more likely to be stopped. You realize that function never left. The police continue to redraw the margins, or the boundaries of who is sort of acceptable and who is disposable. So even if these institutions' violence expresses itself with sort of almost absurdly and inconceivable uh, horrors in the US. I really don't think that by sort of trying to make them supposedly more civil, we completely remove their disciplining and violent function. But it is super typical, and I've heard it actually in discussions with other abolitionists, particularly from the US, talking about sort of Nordic prisons as a possible example, and sort of and the people from Nordic countries and us here in the UK sort of remind them that, you know, it's not because less people are killed by the police or less people are confined by the police that those lives didn't matter. So yeah, we need to think otherwise. We need to think justice otherwise.
Yeah, it feels like people have the different sort of layers of understanding violence. It starts with, okay, violence is when you are physically assaulted. Violence is when you are sexually assaulted. Violence is et cetera, et cetera. And then as soon as you start to like point out to people that actually like keeping someone in a cage, even if you're not physically harming them, is extremely violent. It's violent in so many ways. Like you are restricting a person from engaging with society, you're restricting a person from, being able to, have the freedom to go to the bathroom. I mean, obviously they keep the bathrooms in there and stuff, but that's another part of the violence, right? The dehumanization that people experience. Yeah. So when like people want to like, when people are getting their head round that like early level of abolitionist discussion of like, all right, yeah, I can see how like prisons are violent. Like, all right, in the UK, yeah, sure, I could conceptualize that. But prisons in Sweden, they look pretty sweet, and that's fine. You get to have a PlayStation, and you get to I don't know, work in a kitchen, and it's like, yeah, you could do that in
PlayStation 5s, and they bring all of your meals are personally prepared by a 6 Michelin star gourmet chef.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder if actually, because I'm so intrigued as to, because obviously I imagine that the reading group is like open to the public. Yeah, so I wonder like what kind of, because this is always the stuff for me, because GMTU at the moment is we're having a big thing about political education, obviously in the wake of the riots and stuff like that. We organise in very deprived areas. I've had to have some discussions with some members about things like anti-migrant rhetoric. That's the most common one. Anti-queer rhetoric as well. And I wonder like what kind of conversations you've had in like certain areas where it's been like. Someone has just had like no grasp of abolition.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've actually had an incredible experience because we tend to have about 300 people register. Of course, people who attend are much less, and that has sort of oscillated between 100 to 20. And we always sort of prepare for those situations where people will bring ideas that are maybe hateful or violent, or that their expression might be violent. In reality, like the majority of people, I guess, like you don't really join a reading group if it's such a time commitment already that like if you do that and then sort of spend time just trolling people, like there must be an interest to join something like this. And I think most of the times the kind of people who join are interested in abolition but do not necessarily see what it would, and this is the typical expression, sort of what does it concretely mean. And so I hope that those 7 or 8 sessions, depending on the reading group, help a little bit clarify what that means. Very often, like, some doubts remain, and that's completely fine, because there's something about abolition that I appreciate, which is its sort of openness. There's no set exact series of sort of strategies that will definitely take us there. That sort of liberal certainty about how change occurs isn't there, and in many ways it can be destabilizing, because people again want to know what's the sort of alternatives, like substitute to what we have, that will be equally scalable and function sort of in the same sort of almost industrial way. And I guess like a lot of people end up with a sense that this is something that we are currently building, and a lot of people actually, without even realizing, are building towards abolition, because at the heart of it, there's something that is very interpersonal also, about how to sort of change the way we relate to each other, in order to sort of towards subverting a really unfair, unkind social order and super violent social order. It's rare when sometimes we have people from sort of penitentiary systems or like the criminal legal systems, but they tend to be like honestly very interested. And I think, if you work for a penitentiary system in this country, or you work for the criminal legal system, like surely you must realize that that can't be it. Welcome, learn with us.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. So it's interesting what you're saying about like the need people have for, do you call it the liberal certainty of change? Like I think that when I talked to very liberal orgs, like, and they bring up the like, what's your theory of change question? It's just like, I think people should be nicer to each other, I guess. Fucking, like, not that I don't have a theory of change. Like, it's called The World Is Not Ending. It's on my YouTube channel. But like the what I found interesting in your answer was like there is this wide array of thought in abolition, and I guess to question the name of the org, Abolitionist Futures, like if we're firstly accepting that crucial premise that like we're not looking for any one thing that's going to replace the prison system and just be like a completely uniform, way that people do justice and deal with I guess like harm, or because I'm trying to not use the term crime, obviously, like because this is itself a construct of the ruling class and of the punitive justice system that we have. But like, what are some different approaches? What are some different abolitionist futures that different communities might embrace or different contexts might embrace?
I think it's what you just said in relation to the difference between crime and harm. I want to stop on it for a second because it's so important, and it's very often an aha moment for so many people. Exactly. The purpose of considering justice differently or accountability differently, not through the lens of punishment, but rather through the lens of accountability, reparation, or accountability and healing. Like part of the focus on harm is precisely because crime is such an empty and fabricated category, as you said, a category that serves the ruling classes, and very often, it is important to have in mind that many things that are incredibly harmful in society, like tax evasion, in effect, or when it's by people who sort of have their offshore wealth, or wage theft, or the degradation of material circumstances of so many people through the financial crisis. Like all of these things were incredibly harmful and led to absolutely no response by the criminal legal system. But there's so many things that are prohibited that aren't even harmful themselves. Like if we think of so many behaviors like drug use, which is something that's a topic that is very close to me. So like that distinction between harm is not crime and crime is not harm is incredibly important. But you were asking about what these futures may look like. I think beyond, of course, we can launch into sort of a very long moment of actually imagining what like a moment post-revolution would look like, where we could actually enact abolitionist
Well, I think
ways.
to pull up on that idea for a second, I don't know that it is a post-revolution idea. Like this is part of why in introducing you and the topic today, I said about like the abolitionist the pre-drinks revolution is the sesh idea from Abolition Revolution. Like we have to be practicing stuff now and then building those structures in community to like we practice the abolition of the things we don't like by doing the things that work for us and actually like replace them, right? So maybe it's not the ideal post-revolutionary utopian thing, right? But like what things people can put into practice right now, I suppose.
Yeah, I very often it is a very good way of sort of thinking through it. I tend to imagine sort of there's things that we can do towards abolitionist futures, but I guess what you're talking about is like, what about abolitionist presence? Like what are rehearsals of abolition in the now? There's so many, and we can consider them like from taking away power and resources from the state in order to resource like our own sort of community-led work, to precisely doing that work in the community of responding to our community's needs without the need for institutions of violence and repression and coercion or practices of violence and coercion. So that looks from, I think you had somebody from RATS here, Conrad, who was talking about the London Harm Reduction Hub, a place where people who use drugs and sex workers can just come to get equipment for safer drug use, materials for safer sex, advice on drugs and sex work, access to legal support, because many of these people are sort of facing tremendous violence from the state. So that is already a project that is put in place with the intention of prefiguring abolition or working towards these abolitionist futures that we were evoking before. And it's almost for me like abolition is both like the ultimate political vision and at the same time the doing. Mariam Kabat talks about abolition being sort of, yes, this political vision of a world where no one is considered disposable and everyone can fit and thrive. And we live sort of lives of interdependence and solidarity, and rather than sort of being organized by the racial capitalist order. She talks also about it as a structural analysis of oppression, understanding that it is important to address systems beyond interpersonal conflict is rooted in systems of oppression. So it's another thing that abolition invites us to consider. How do we respond to immediate needs while we are at the same time chipping away at these structures of oppression? And finally, like, yeah, she talks about it as a practical organizing strategy. Like, what do we do in the now to walk towards that vision? Having in mind also that structural analysis of oppression. But yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of campaigns trying to enact decrim and remove those powers from the state in this country. For example, you have No More Exclusions, who's doing great work ending the power that the educational system currently has to remove kids who are considered disruptive or even sort of violent, and suggest instead, the kinds of money that goes into the bureaucracies that are responsible for making those exclusions happen. And we could make the same case in relation to prisons. The amount of money that is poured in these systems of violence and neglect, those resources would be incredibly precious in the hand and incredibly effective in the hands of organized communities. So part of it is also, yeah, how do we resource ourselves and divest from these institutions and encourage the state to divest from these institutions?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're saying about like that much, those resources would be so much better used in the hands of the people who are like the subjects of the system. Like, so that what that reminds me of is the Trieste model. I read Mad World by Misha Fraser Carroll recently, which is a great abolitionist text on mental illness and like people being, how mental illness is treated in society, because it relates to a big essay that I'm working on. But the Trieste model is listed right at the end of the book when Misha Fraser Carroll is discussing different alternatives to institutionalizing people and psychiatry and the existing psychological treatment system we have. And in the Trieste model, like the patient is put at the center of the care, and there is no hierarchy between staff and patients. And I think even saying patient is kind of not really like appropriate. It's their service users, right? And they aren't in any way carceralized. They aren't like they it's like Trieste turned it, I think it was back in the 70s they did this, like turned their mental hospital into this facility where it was like a community treatment model, and people have, like there's the opportunity to give someone a job, and there's the opportunity, like there's just like putting people who need help to recover and find a kind of security for themselves, like in charge of that project for themselves. And there's a great quote in the book that says, like, no one has talked to me about prescribing anything, and no one has talked to me about a diagnosis. But I'm sure that if I wanted to take pills or I wanted a diagnosis, that wouldn't be a problem either. But there's just no one has, because it's about what I want and moving through it that way. And the Trieste model has been adopted in places like around Italy. And when I was researching it more, I found like places in Central Asia. There was a delegation, including from Kazakhstan was the country that I remember, like coming to Trieste to examine it and find out how it works. The thing I was going to say in relation to your thing about the resources being allocated directly to people instead is like, the Trieste model is not less costly to run. Like it costs essentially just exactly as much, but the recovery rates are like tremendously higher, because like you're treating people like people rather than treating them like problems, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's such amazing. I hadn't encountered it actually. I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's worth noting like mental illness and how we treat people experiencing poor mental health as another question of abolition, because you already moved the topic from prisons to criminalized people, which is not, it's a hugely overlapping topic, but like drug users and sex workers, for example, and also I think that Rats talked a little bit about migrants, all forms of criminalized people, although like winding up in prison is a possible outcome of being a criminalized person, like they are a separate group to prisoners. And like, yeah, I think we should acknowledge that like abolition touches just so many different, effectively it touches everyone in society, of course, but also like that there are different specific groups it targets, it like relates to the most. And I think that, yeah, so mental illness is another topic that's very crucial to abolition.
There's this great something that you just said, and it made me think of this great quote. And as soon as I evoked it, like it left my brain. Of course. Oh yes. The idea that like I think it is easy to get overwhelmed today by how much is going wrong. Like very often when people talk to me about drug policy, for example, or harm reduction, or responses to drugs in general in societies, like, okay, what would be it? And very often I feel, tremendously overwhelmed, because there's so many things that are missing. There's so many things that we could do. And Ruth Wilson Gilmore says that should also be a source of energy and vision, because it means that you can start everywhere. Like there's just so many things to change. And very often, like when people ask me about how they can get involved, of course I will tell them of the organizations and groups that already exist. But very often is about like find your friends and the people who are close to you and in your communities, and consider what is it that's off and that you could collectively address, or even without changing, even without creating sort of like a specific group. Like I think being more intentional about practices of care, for example, in relation to drugs, like if with friends you are about to go on a night out, why not have a discussion about what to do if something goes awry? Like, how do people feel about the police being called on them? Like, maybe that person doesn't want that. So like, that preparation for me is also sort of abolitionist or abolitionist leaning, like is abolitionist praxis, because it prefigures those relations where, yeah, we are responsible for each other, kind of thing. But yeah, there's so much that can be done, and Trieste model, I'm definitely gonna check it out.
I was thinking about what we were talking about before in terms of inter-community conflicts. It's all systemic oppression, right? And in terms of, you know, doing abolition, the closest thing that I'm doing to abolition at the moment is working through conflict resolution. As chair of GMTU, it's obviously extremely important in an org to have you know, a good understanding of conflict and what it is, why it happens, how to resolve it, and it's surprisingly easy in terms of like the theory. The theory is easy. The theory is like, okay, so, you know, people find issues of conflict really hard to deal with because people, when they're hurt and they're feeling harmed, come up with big nebulous terms like, I'm not feeling safe, I'm not feeling supported, I'm not feeling what's another one that people say? I'm not feeling listened to, right? And so that can feel very like big and huge to the person who's trying to resolve the conflict, and also to the person who it's aimed at. So it might be aimed at a particular person in the organization, and because it's so big and because it's so nebulous, that inspires this sort of like feeling of dismissal, which is often what accused people do. They go, "This is nonsense. I can't be like thinking about what you're, you know, not listened to. I make sure that everybody listens to me, etc., etc." So what it's about really is just, you know, get into the nitty gritty, and you just say to the person, when would you start to feel supported? When do you think you'll feel safe? When do you think you're going to feel like you're being listened to? And, you know, once you get like a clear picture of where that person's actually coming from, then you can get an idea if actually, you know, the conflict is real and there's definitely harm being caused, or someone's just being really like selfish and and just wants it to be about them. So it's like, it's super interesting, like learning about the theory of it. But that obviously, theory is one thing, practice is completely different. And in terms of that, like, I don't know if abolitionist futures have any sort of like experience in like practicing that sort of conflict resolution in real life, but yeah, I'd love to hear it if you have any, even if you have any sort of like you know, thoughts on the theory and stuff. It's all good stuff.
Yeah, no, it's thank you for that, because it is incredibly, I think we're all, there's this idea, I think Mariam Kaba has a text called Fumbling Towards Repair, like this feeling of experimenting new ways of being with each other and how uncomfortable and imperfect those attempts are, because we all are sort of swimming in a completely callous social order. So like trying to practice different worlds in the cracks of this one is by no means easy. Very recently, we got an email from someone saying that there's a reading in our list by the Chrysalis Collective, who specialize in transformative justice and accountability processes. And there's one case study in the reading list there about how they did it, and how sort of a group of people that were close to the person who had been harmed, and a group of people around the person that like trusted people around each one of them prepared enormously in order to sort of be of support to both. And most of the work was done actually like separately. The idea wasn't sort of like putting these people in a room and sort of thrashing it out. I think all instances of conflict resolution would ideally look different, because conflict and harm and the people involved will be incredibly different. So that's another reason why when people ask about scalability, I'm like, I don't think that's ever going to be scalable. Like, these are going to be incredibly organic, should be incredibly organic and adaptable processes. But somebody wrote to say, well, the person who did harm in that case went and did harm again. So you need to remove this case study from, and it's like, okay, I think maybe people have misunderstood what we're doing with these readings, because it's definitely not give a recipe, add water and you have now justice in society. These are all attempts at doing things differently, as I was saying earlier, and very often they don't work because like there's so many pressures that all the people involved in those processes are subjected to. And indeed, in this case study, they worked for, I think, a whole year with these two people to respond to a case of sexual abuse. So a really difficult situation. And yeah, in the end, it didn't lead to, like, many of the people who were involved in the process actually felt disappointed of the process. Others had felt good because at least they have sort of used their agency in a way that was a bit less hopeless. But yeah, there's no sort of one size fits all to addressing these instances of conflict and harm, I guess, is my perhaps unsatisfactory.
No,
that's
not
super
unsatisfactory
real.
at all. Yeah, it is really. Yeah.
That's so true. Something I think about honestly all the time that I heard kind of secondhand from someone who has been involved in a lot of organizing that involves conflict resolution was like, this person had said that like accountability processes and conflict resolution just absolutely never work the way people imagine that they do work. And that like people, like in pretty much every case, there'll be people leaving the whole thing just like still pissed off, people still, like not be talking to each other or whatever. And I think there's something really like, I don't know, I think there's something really important in understanding like people being people and people acting the way that people always act. Like I think there's something like, I think there's definitely an imagination of, again, like we'll formulate a perfect recipe and it'll make it so that when we do conflict resolution, because we'll do it perfectly, we'll do it exactly right, at the end of it, the people involved will be on great terms, everything will be sorted, they'll agree on what happened, what went wrong, and what was done to make sure it wouldn't happen again, and then everything will be fine. And it's like, no. Like even if I even were to correct from there and say like, no, the thing you need to do is make sure is like only the things within your power to make sure that like the same thing won't happen again, like even that would be getting too close to like, that's the recipe for how you do this right. I think it's important to like, one of the things I think it's important to recognize, and the reason I brought this idea up is like recognizing people will be pissed off with each other when there's conflict, and sometimes relationships break down, and sometimes they've already broken down by the time you're getting there, and like those people are not going to reconcile, there's not going to be any progress on that front or whatever. Yeah, I don't know if I have a question off the back of that, but that's the thought about it. Just like people aren't going to cohere to a recipe, like you say.
No, yeah, and I think I think that like going off what you were saying, Juan, there, because it's so like spot on. The theory is all well and good, but actually we need multiple different kinds of theory, and also multiple different anecdotes of experience and people who have experience and all this kind of stuff, because human beings are messy, gross, weird, smelly, stinky, do weird things, say weird things, think odd things. We're not like we're fundamentally opposing these systems of oppression and capital, which serve to put us in boxes, right? That's what the prison system is. That's what marginalization is, etc., etc. So to sort of like try and put the solution in a box is absurd as well. And I think that like, yeah, people want justice into like transformative justice. I think they focus on the word justice because it's like, well, what's justice to me? And like, I was actually speaking about this with my grandma last week, because unfortunately someone in our family has been suffering from incestuous sexual abuse from their granddad. No, it's fucking nightmarish. But basically, I was sat there talking with my grandma about it, and she's seen a fair share of stuff in her lifetime. At the hands of men, at the hands of abusive men and stuff. And I was sat there, saying as an abuse survivor, saying like, for me, if you can't get that thing back that they took from you, if it's your childhood, if it's your innocence, if it's your, whatever, then, there is simply nothing to be done in terms of like, there's nothing that you can do that can get that stuff back. So then what is justice then? What does justice become? And you have this sort of like, that's where capitalism, that's where the prison system, that's where the carceral system sort of takes hold of people and demands that we, demand things like the death penalty and prison for 8,000 years and, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, actually, for me, justice personally, I say this as an abuse survivor. Justice for me personally would be every single school in the world teaching kids from a young age what consent and power is about. And how do we build towards that? How do we build towards that kind of that is a route to abolition, as it were. Do you know what I mean? Like the abolishment of the patriarchy, the abolishment of rape, kind of thing. And I think abolition. It's literally in the title of the stream. The abolition of patriarchy, the abolition of rape. I think so people get tied up with this idea of what justice is, and they really quickly go to like, oh well, maybe this person needs to give me £1,000, and that's just never going to happen, especially if that person is like working class or something. I guess that what happens is people get the idea of justice still, I think, from liberal society, neoliberal society, but they want to engage with this really like cool leftist idea because they know it's cool and leftist, and I think that's where things get lost a lot of the time, and people come away disappointed. I don't have a question of that. I just go ahead if you have thoughts.
It makes me think of so many things. Thank you so much for sharing so generously, of course. I think you're spot on in this idea of justice and how the criminal legal system has corrupted what justice really is. It's almost like the criminal legal system behaves a little bit like a medical institution. Like there's a problem, we do this intervention, and then justice has been made. At the collective, very often we say, like, justice would have been for Chris Kaba not to be murdered. Like that justice isn't possible now. Like justice has, a tremendous ultimate injustice has occurred, and the incredible violence and harm that family has been subjected to is in effect irreparable. Like there's so much, of course, that you can do to respond to it. There's so many things that can be done to make so many of the people involved accountable, but the outcome will not be justice. It won't necessarily feel good. It won't necessarily lead to forgiveness or people feeling good about what happened, because what happened was incredibly violent and harmful. But it's precisely almost because once that harm has happened, like you cannot go back, you cannot backtrack. It's precisely because of that we should take harm and violence seriously and really seek to think, why has this happened and how do we make sure it doesn't? And I really like that you talked about patriarchy, because in relation to sexual abuse, because precisely the idea of transformative justice is not just responding to the immediate needs of the person who has been harmed, and of course the person who harmed, and seeking accountability in that unfair relationship that has been formed between these two people, but also look at what are the root causes and more structural conditions that led and made possible that harm and that violence to occur in the first place. And exactly, you cannot think of sexual violence, particularly domestic sexual violence, without talking about patriarchy and anti-patriarchal praxis. Before I was talking about, we were sort of talking to some extent, and we're touching upon it now still, like this idea of like, then if it doesn't feel good and if it doesn't lead to forgiveness and if it doesn't lead to sort of inverted commas repair, then why is it, what is it doing? And I think part of it, like the attempt is worth it in and of itself, like attempting to respond to that harm in a way that isn't punitive and isn't doesn't treat people as disposable, is part of this experimentation that ultimately takes us elsewhere. Like abolitionists believe in prefigurative politics, like the idea that like we need to start practicing and doing what we expect to see in a liberated world, if that liberated world is ever to come, even if currently those practices will be incredibly imperfect and sort of, as we were just discussing, they are valuable because they add to, like, they practice that collective muscle of how do we respond to violence and harm in a way that is serious and meaningful. And I'm also thinking, in doing that, potentially we are removing at least two people from interacting with the criminal legal system, which in and of itself reproduces harm and is criminogenic, to borrow that weird expression from criminology. It creates further harm. So yeah, I think it's still valuable, even if the results might not feel good. As long as
it's good.
it responds both to the immediate and the structural.
Yeah, I think it's good because it's realistic in that way, in that like it isn't gonna feel immediately good. People aren't gonna get like this. We live in that society, don't we, where it's like, okay, you're hungry, go to the shop, get some fucking chocolate, you feel great. You wanna bust a nut, go on fucking Pornhub, watch that, get that done. You wanna get justice, throw a person in prison, etc. Right? That's kind of like the society that we live in, and actually the world that we live in is completely different. It's not, this is a complete illusion in terms of like the actual reality of world. Like, when we talk about going to the shop to get food, it's actually, well, no, cultivating the crops to actually create food, grow food, etc. is such a long, process. It's, it's not something that is like immediately gratifying. It's something like, I've been growing fucking tomatoes on my windowsill for the last year, and there's like, I don't know, 13 tomatoes, 14 cherry tomatoes. Do you know what I mean? And that's cool because I've never grown anything before, but at the same time, it's like, no, actually, it takes a long time to get most stuff from the earth, and we're part of the earth, and obviously it takes a lot. In that way, we have to understand it takes a long time to get transformative justice right in a way. And so you're actually teaching people in that regard that, like, yeah, you're not getting like a quick dopamine hit of justice here. You're actually engaging in like a longer, more holistic way of dealing with harm and abuse.
I think when we were on the ZAD, which, like, to talk about again, like, communities that are living with a discomfort, like deliberately sitting with something uncomfortable, that like the ZAD is not one community body. It acts that way when it's resisting any kind of force, the state or property developers or whatever, trying to take the land away from them. But on the day-to-day basis, like, it is a ton of little communes, and each commune has its own thing they figured out about everything to do with their own commune, how they're going to deal with conflict, sure, but like, you just like how they do the chores or whatever. Like, when we were going around day to day, like, I don't know, we went to one commune and they were like, oh, today is the day we're cleaning everything, so like we'll have less time for an interview or whatever. And it was like, oh, right, it's just basic differences of like their own personal management styles. And for them, conflict resolution was, they described it to us as like something that is always a tough topic because there's always someone pissed off with absolutely every outcome. And like, their there are people who've there are people in every intentional living community who have ultimately just left, because, to revisit that earlier point, human beings are just human beings. They're messy. You can't actually theory your way through to the perfect ending with absolutely every situation. And they raised, on the ZAD, they raised conflict resolution and helping people through mental health crises with the two things that are their biggest sticking points in the way they live. Not that they bring down the way they live. The way they live is too robust for that, but it's the two things that people are most continually dissatisfied with. And the other thought I had was, and I think it is related to this, but it's a much more much more theory-brained thought, which is in On Kings, David Graeber talks about the kind of appeal to people of a king is so much in justice. And a lot of On Kings is analyzing the political structure of kingdoms and monarchy, and how many of those elements translate into our world and how we live despite having gotten rid of kings broadly, right? So the appeal to people of a king is that a king has absolute right to rule, and therefore justice is this crucial element that everyone will be treated equally by the king, because the king is this very far away guy who has nothing to do with your life and doesn't have a bias, therefore, right? So you can bring your grievance in front of the king and the king can decide. And our criminal justice system evolves directly out of that, very literally directly out of that. And I think that is Mule, you described it as it's a quick solution. I think that is it. It is not wanting to sit with the discomfort of we're not going to be totally happy with how this goes, but it will be better than letting some absolute fucking maniac with a tinfoil hat and a sword decide that this person should be put to death because they stole a chicken or something. I think that it's ultimately, so much of it is rooted in being able to sit with the intra-community and inter-community difficulties of living day by day, right?
Well, this ties in. I was just about to say some stuff earlier, but I didn't realize I was muted. But this links in perfectly because of what Mule was saying about these quick solutions where it's people want this justice immediately, but a lot of transformative justice processes actually require community, all these bonds to exist or whatever. And it's you can't just you can't go through, you can't just out of nowhere just get a bunch of people that have no, it's this king that has no allegiance to anyone or whatever like that. It's I think the essence of these being really successful is people being accountable to each other. And I mean, this is kind of informed by my own cultural background, but so Maori, Te Ao Maori led justice processes, kind of there's been this thing for years where people have said that their traditional practices are so influential on transformative justice models, or transform, this back and forth. And it's actually, that's a misconception. A lot of these models, like Zer and people like that, they developed these models separately that just happened to parallel. And so when that kind of stuff started getting really popular in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people went oh, this is actually kind of really similar to how Maori do it in their communities. So, maybe there's some kind of thing there, which has led to some weird stuff where it's the government will start funding these transformative justice initiatives, and they'll say oh, this is tikanga led, this is Maori processes or whatever, but all it really means is that they're doing their thing, and they'll give you 5 minutes at the start to do a karakia, a little chant sort of thing and stuff like that. But some of the really most effective transformative justice community-led things I've seen have been through this Maori kind of model. Lots of different names for it. A lot of people in English call it the community circle model or something like that. But it's kind of so we have this kind of I guess it's the traditional conception of a commune or a village is called a marae, and it's a communal space, like land with there's like buildings on it, like a meeting house, is all this kind of stuff like that. And so it represents like an extended family, like your kind of like sub tribe or whatever. Everyone there is like tangentially related in some way. You all have these bonds. It is like, it's people that you generally have something to do with, even if you don't see them all the time, even if you only go there like once a year or once every couple of years or whatever like that. These are people that are linked to you in some way. And in the kind of Maori way of things, it's like we're all accountable to each other in this kind of tribal group, So in like the 80s and 90s, we had a woman, Aroha Teri, who was really good. She was running these marae-led restorative justice programs because she was seeing, she was specifically focused on sexual violence because she was seeing, on one hand, there were a lot of Maori men that were going to jail for sexual violence, where it was like very like kind of like racist kind of like lynching kind of situations. But I'd say like that was part of it, but primarily it was because of the way that the criminal justice system re-traumatizes the victims as well, and how it never really led to any kind of actual like outcome. Like there was never like, people would come away from it being like, I just wish I didn't go to, I didn't tell the police I didn't go to court anyway, because like everyone's life is objectively worse for having gone through this process. So Aroha Thierry used to on these things where she would go to, like, it would be marae focus, so it would be the actual like family and tribal affiliates of the people involved in this, people that were invested in seeing positive outcomes for both sides. And it was like a combination of kind of like these like communal talks at like different levels. Like sometimes it would just be like, okay, maybe it's only 3 people, sometimes it gets wider to like the wider community, all this kind of stuff. And it like some people jokingly used to call them like struggle sessions, because it's like very much that kind of thing where it's like you're in front of the community and people are saying like, this is what you've done. But it was this kind of thing.
I was going to make
like,
exactly that joke when you started describing it. I was like, oh, so a struggle session.
yeah. But I think there's like, like there is a parallel there, because it is like an effective way of demonstrating to a person the harm that they have caused to a community. But it would also include things like, oh, these are like kind of our like our cultural kind of protocols that you have violated by doing this, and this is like the effect that you've had on the community, and all these kind of things. And they were actually super successful. But the thing is, it's like these same processes don't always work for people outside, because for Maori that are affiliated with a marae, we have these networks and everything already. Whereas like, like if it's like if it was in a inner city community with 2 people that don't really know each other, aside from this instance of harm, you don't really have that kind of like that community thing, which is like like obviously where these things get like a lot more difficult and harder and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's also perhaps where the kind of like the government attempts at bringing these things into a more wider thing has failed, because they haven't recognized that the community is kind of like such an essential part of that. But yeah, I don't know, maybe we might be getting a bit too close to the end to get into a broader question as this, but I was going to ask if anyone had any thoughts on that, about that, because we talk a lot about these kind of justice processes within people that have to be in community with each other, but it's like, how do we map that to that outside of that? Like, yeah, I don't know, that's probably maybe a bigger question for like to sneak in right at the end here. But I mean, Juan, do you have any thoughts on that? On like like, is there a way that you have seen anyone approach that or anything like that?
that was also great, and shout out to People Against Prisons Aotearoa, because they are an abolitionist group doing great work
Oh yeah, they're
in
the
Aotearoa.
best. My
Yeah,
besties.
very good
Yeah.
materials. Like, I keep getting inspired by the resources that they produce. What you're saying is like spot on, like the importance of building community, and like very often when people ask, you know, we have a whole sort of session on everyday abolition. This idea that like it's not just about sort of achieving that the Met cannot do stop and search anymore. Like, that would be a fantastic goal, but you can start building abolition where you are with the people that surround you, and like even knowing racial capitalism pushes us to be alienated and so sort of individualized, and I think abolition invites us to build community. Like, who are your neighbors? How come you live a decade in a place and you don't even know who the person is next to you? Like, and that is, it's not to sort of shame people. Like, these are, it almost feels like by design that this is how we live, like in the islands of our nuclear families or the islands of our houses. But transformative justice is collective work. Healing is collective work. Addressing harm and violence in society should be collective work. And yeah, I mean, as you were saying, like building those bonds can only facilitate that healing and responses that are truly transformative and not just and I also later, maybe if there's another section, like there's a whole point of also not idealizing, and you sort of hinted at it, not idealizing community, because there are imperfections in the way we organize with each other. And I'm not saying that sort of a process that is created by a community will be perfect, and not at all. But definitely it has to be collective work.
Yeah, I think something that I've seen in like conflict resolution and accountability processes going wrong is I've seen people repeatedly say of people who have caused harm that like they that like basically precluding someone from being in a conversation about them because that person has a personal connection to them, and saying like, you can't advocate for this person, you're their partner or you're their friend or whatever. And like, and it's just like, but of course, like, who is going to advocate? Like, are you imagining they're going to hire like a lawyer, but not a lawyer, like an abolitionist lawyer for like, a community media, like someone perfectly impartial who will then not be impartial and be their advocate instead? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, you have to, and I think that's something I think like I now see as a big red flag in when I encounter conflict resolution stuff, is if one side is saying this person shouldn't be advocating for this person because they have a personal connection. They're just trying to say this person should have no advocates. They should have no one on their side, and therefore like no community, like no one who is on that part of like of the resolution, right?
I wonder to which extent is a mimicking of precisely the criminal legal system. Like, it's one that sort of outsources conflict resolution to someone else, privatizes conflict resolution or responding to harm and violence. And that's an impulse in people, in the same way that there's a huge impulse in people to punish. Punishing feels good, that someone else that has harmed you is receiving punishment. In the absence of anything else, it feels it can even feel good. It can even feel rewarding.
In the short term, I'd argue. I think that like people generally always find this to be like a kind of short term catharsis, and then long term they're like, okay, well, it returns to that like, well, I didn't get anything back, right? So we're going to ask audience questions. So Wintry Mute has asked, how can viewers practice the principles of abolition in their day-to-day life? And I was thinking this is a perfect question for you when you mentioned that there's an everyday abolition session that you do.
Yeah, I mean, from what I was saying, like, and I don't want to either sort of simplify too much the idea of abolition or co-opt it to something about just being civil, but like actually caring about like who you are in community with is an abolitionist practice. Doing as much as possible to ensure that the way you interact with the world and others is caring and kind, which is again not to ignore that some people like there is such a thing as political. We do have political enemies in building this vision, and definitely when I talk about sort of a world of kindness and care, I don't mean not responding forcefully to the people who want actually to maintain the status quo or even take it further into an even more unsafe world. But yeah, like in the relationships that you have with others, like that is a great place to start practicing abolitionist principles. Not responding, like there's something as simple, I think one of the readings mentioned it, something as simple as if there's been conflict with a friend, like we consider whether sort of stop talking to that person is a constructive or useful way of responding to, especially responding to something that could be mended. Maybe there's something in there about not running away from conflict, not running away from uncomfortable conversations with the people who are close to you. I was saying earlier about organizing with the people who surround you for the things that you care about, and that is literally can be anything. That is precisely why I joined and I'm involved in rats. I'm a drug user. I realize that the conditions in this country for people who use drugs are terrible. I'm compelled to do something to change those conditions, and the best way I can advance that change is through associating with others who are in a similar situation and who are close to me. And I think we can apply that to so many aspects. Like, and there's so many communities that very often when I'm talking, I sort of don't say certain things because I assume that everyone that's listening knows this, but like marginalized and criminalized communities have developed networks of support and care that are incredibly effective in terms of, for example, how to navigate the medical institution, how to share knowledge about substances that we have no clue because of prohibition of what's in them. There's so many sort of little practices of care and support and networks of peers of care and support in these marginalized and criminalized communities that historically have not been able to rely on the state to respond to the harm that they themselves experience. And that I think present a lot of lessons for people who aren't necessarily in those communities and may be interested in living in a way that's more principled and towards abolitionist goals. Like maybe there's something in there about how are you more intentional about being there for the people who surround you and concern yourself for others. Maybe wishy-washy, but that's where I am.
No, I think that was a great answer. I don't think it was too wishy-washy.
So next up, we got Q for Juan. What's your favorite book out of the Abolitionist Futures reading list? It can be either your favorite, like what you'd most recommend someone new to the topic, or one that you really enjoyed.
Without a doubt, Abolition Revolution, because of three things. One,
it's just the fucking best.
It's amazing. So it's incredibly pedagogical. Like it's really good at teaching people what abolition could be. That is one of its selling points. It's very sort of easy to read, and I think it will sort of be well understood by a lot of people, and I really appreciate that. Second, it's very encompassing. Like each of the theses in the book concerns so many different facets and dimensions of abolition, and that's really, really interesting. Another one is that it doesn't detach abolition from a revolutionary project. I think there is a risk that liberal academics and liberal practitioners in nonprofits, there's a risk in them sort of adopting the language of abolition without the ultimate sort of revolutionary horizon. And I appreciate that this book makes it very clear that no, we're not talking about, there's no abolition without revolution. And the last thing is, it has so many examples that are based in the UK. And I think this disrupt a little bit that narrative that suggests that this is a movement from the US. Actually, there was an abolitionist magazine in the UK. It's literally called The Abolitionist, that ran from 1979 to 1989, if I'm not wrong. So already a while back, having similar discussions to what we're having now. If not prisons, then what? And yeah, we're part of that legacy that is definitely international, even if in the US it has been cultivated with particular sort of care and attention.
It's been an absolutely nightmare episode for questions. They're all the questions that we have for you. Obviously, you're just such a good guest at explaining abolition that no one needs any further clarifying questions whatsoever. I did want to touch on something that we were sort of talking about earlier, and like what Tim was sort of expanding on a little bit, because I think it's really important to consider when it comes to abolition. Is like we were talking about people not feeling comfortable to sit with the sort of, you know, long process kind of thing. It's that discomfort, and also a desire for like a quick fix, like a dopamine fix. And you know what Tim was saying about sort of like, you know, in this sort of like Maori abolition, it's like you're accountable to the community, and it's like, I think that that's really important, and there has to be alongside that as well. Like if we're going to try and have any kind of, you know, transformative justice in our lifetime to sort of like plant those seeds, we have to think about like, well, actually people don't want any additional discomfort in their lives. That's mainly what it is. You know, human beings can tolerate like a degree of discomfort. You know, it's like Sophie was talking about people on the ZAD, like literally, yeah, they could sit there in discomfort, you know, and that is their choice, like they're choosing to do it. We have the option not to in urban, I guess, metropolitan society, capitalist society. We have the option to sort of shut ourselves in our rooms, watch Netflix. You know, some people have work from home jobs. You just like literally never have to go outside if you don't want to. Just order delivery all the time. It's fine. You know, and that's kind of like this like uber comfort dystopia that we live in, right? When you're in the sort of fucking imperial core. And I think that like, if we're in a situation, if we start to build communities where actually like, you know, we are sort of having that different perception of comfort. I think, like, for example, I was talking about growing food earlier. It's like, okay, encourage people to go to community gardens, understand how long it takes to grow food, understand the joy that comes from actually harvesting food that you've grown yourself or with your comrades. And also, like, on top of that, you know, working towards abolition in different ways as well, and like building those levels of community to a point where it's like, well, actually I feel super comfortable with everybody around me, and therefore like I'm super comfortable to be like accountable to everyone around me, and I'm also super comfortable with the idea that everybody around me is also invested in keeping me safe. And I think that that's like the key, right? We have to start building a society where it's literally like, you know, everybody has that comfort so that they can go through the discomfort of normal human conflict, to actually be able to sit with it, I think. But yeah, I just wanted to get that in there before the end of the episode. I had a big thought.
I think that was
and I had to yap
great
it out.
addition. Thanks for yapping it out. Juan, do you have any closing thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, maybe the last one is we can start building these sort of infrastructures of care and support. I've talked a lot about friends and the people who surround you, but it doesn't have to be your friends. Like, you can very intentionally, like there's a piece in the reading list about like pods, which is basically like the people around you who will be there if you need support. And one of the things that the author stresses is they don't have to be your friends. You don't need to in order to care for someone and offer support to someone, you don't have to be their best friend. You don't have to be like recognizing each other in our shared humanity is also very powerful. Like, and being there for others that aren't necessarily sort of our friends or our family. Bent Bars has this amazing letter writing project with people who are queer and trans who are imprisoned. It's a great way to sort of do the kind of thing that we were talking about, like build bonds even beyond sort of the immediacy of our sort of friendship circle or family. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Of course, when we have guests on our planet, we ask them to assign some homework. So what is the homework for our chat this week?
I think Evolution Revolution now getting it. I think it's on discount at the moment, also 40% discount if I'm not wrong, or at least it was 2 weeks ago. I think that's your homework. There's amazing videos online of courses or webinars with Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who's also a fantastic speaker and pedagogue. Heavily recommended. So yeah, that's my dual homework.
Okay. And if you want to check
Awesome.
out the full Abolitionist Futures reading list, the link also for that is abolitionistfutures.com/reading-groups-events. So yeah. Okay. Thank you, Juan, so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you all. Have
Thanks
a
so
great
much.
rest of the evening.
Take care, Juan.
Bye.
Other things left to do. First off, we have to promote our Patreon and let you all know that Patreon support is how this show gets made. This is a show that is funded by its viewers. So go over to patreon.com/red_planet. There are a bunch of different tiers there at which you can support us to different degrees for different rewards. You can go read about them on patreon.com/red_planet. But at the highest tier, which is, of course, our sickos, you get the reward of a personal thank you on every episode. So thank you to JBP, Queen Pib, and Risk Inverse for being our sickos and making the show possible. Next on the things we've got to do at the end of the show, I've got to say, because Tim is going to be away for the whole of October.
What?
Tim, if people want more of you while you're away, because they'll be yearning, they'll be screaming out, "Where's my Tim?" I will be every episode. I'm going to open every episode like that.
Me too.
I think I might actually make it back in time for the last one of October. I'm not sure yet though. But yeah.
But when we are left tragically Timless and we're just crying into our pie about having no Tim, where can people find more Tim?
So you can find me. I haven't streamed on Twitch in a while, but if you want to follow me on Twitch, you can just find me here as here and on YouTube, Twitch and YouTube as Conquest of Dread, but then on Twitter and Blue Sky and stuff, you can find me as Dread Conquest. I'm going to be away for most of October. I'll get back right at the end. But I'll be tweeting up a storm, I'm sure. I'll have plenty of time on that phone. Otherwise, I'll be out of it for a while. If you're interested in stuff like tabletop RPGs, though, please do go and check out. I've been working on one for a little while, and it's pretty much almost ready to be released. Just waiting on a couple little things here and there. But you can jump on Twitter and go to Dark RPG 2000. You can see a little bit of what it's about. It's like a very like dystopian future kind of, cyberpunky working class. I don't know. It's cool. Take my word for it. Check it out if you're into that kind of thing. Because after I get back, I'll be kind of doing the final little things I need to put that out and get that published. So but what about Mule? Where can we find out more about Mule?
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait for Tim's extremely uber online brain rot era. I'm really excited for Tim to be posting up a storm while he's away. Just wanted to add that in there. to my little self-promo section. That's how much I'm going to miss you, Tim. So for me, I'm actually putting a new video out. It's probably going to be out tomorrow. It's called Fuck Corporate Pride or something along those lines. I can't remember. Very, very low effort. Probably just don't even bother watching it. I don't know. It doesn't seem that good. Like, I just recorded it on my stream camera that I use for Red Planet. But like, no, actually, there's a significant quality drop from my last videos. That's not even speculation. It's quite possibly one of the worst things you've ever seen in your life. But no, you should still go and support that if you want to support me, because that's why you do it, right? Because you support me, not because my content's good. It'll be out tomorrow. It's about corporate pride. The audio is good, I guess. YouTube.com/C/DJ Mule, DJMUEL. Also, give me money on Patreon. I've got a job at the moment, but I really don't want that. Sophie?
Yeah, sure. So you can that was all very silly. You can find all my stuff at linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. My Patreon is patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. I've got that tight branding. You can find me everywhere as Sophie from Mars. That's the name. I have just put a video out. It's called The Endings Machine, and it's my first video back from hiatus. And I'm going to be putting out another video. Well, okay, so my next video is about Aaron Bushnell, and therefore it's also about the genocide. And so I really want to have it up for patrons, even if it's not got the musical finished by October 7th. Hopefully that will be the case. And then it'll be out as soon as my music person has done the music. Anyway, if you want to check that out early, it'll be up on my patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. If you just want to support me, Patreon. If you want to support me right this instant, because you know that I struggle to pay rent and bills and afford food, then you can also, through my link tree, find my PayPal and just send me money. Yeah, I have a Tumblr where I do some writing, and yeah, I mean, I think just keep on checking out linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. I will add anything else like my Substack or whatever when it's relevant and it has stuff on it to check out. In the meantime, that's us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.